Welcome to the sRedList Data Definition Prioritizer. This is the result of a paper we published in Conservation Biology in 2023. See the link in the video description. The goal is to help you identify which species were data deficient in their last assessment but could most likely be reassessed in another category if you reassess them today. We have applied this method to odonates, amphibians, reptiles and mammals. We prioritize species based on 3 different indices. PDS. This is how likely we estimate the species could be reassessed in a non-data deficient category. It will be high, for instance, for a species with many GBIF records that lives in an area with few other data deficient species and that has a relatively large range size. DPDS, this is how much the probability PDS increased since last assessment. It will be high, for instance, for a species that gained many GBIF records or for which many scientific articles have been published since the last assessment. AOH loss and forest loss. This is how much habitat, or forest for forest specialists, was lost in the last 10 years or 3 generations. If it's above 20%, it means that you can probably reassess the species in a threatened or near threatened category based on this information. We then merge these different indices in a global priority index called prioritiser. We suggest that species with prioritiser closest to 100 should be the first to be reassessed. Now let me show you how the data deficient prioritizer works. You can access it directly from the sRedList platform, clicking here. First, you have to select a group among mammals, amphibians, reptiles and odonates. Then you will see a space cut in 3 parts. Top left is a scatterplot to visualize priority species. Bottom is a table to filter species and explore priority species. Top right is a place to visualize more information on single species. Let's start with the scatterplot. It shows you the 3 indices I was talking about. PDS, the probability to be reassessed in a different category than data deficient, in x-axis. DPDS, the increase in this probability since last assessment, in y-axis. And if the species lost more than 20% of its area of habitat, with the dark points. This means, for instance, that this species is of high priority because it's very likely to be reassessed in a non-data deficient category. This species is also of high priority because we have many new information since its last assessment. The probability to be reassessed in a non-data deficient category is then very high. This species is also of high priority because we think it lost more than 30% of its habitat, which suggests it can probably be classified as vulnerable. This species is likely not a reassessment priority. On the plot you can see species name and prioritiser by positioning your mouse on the point. You can zoom in and out and also isolate a certain priority category by double-clicking on the legend. Finally, you can select species you want to include in the table. By default, all species are in the table, but you can select on the plot with these tools, and the table will only include the selected subset. Let's move to the table. In this table, you can find the scientific name of the species, its family, realm, the year of last assessment, the different metrics we calculated, the number of GBIF records in 2023 at the time of last assessment, and a score telling you the increase. Same for the number of articles published in the Web of Science mentioning that species. For each of these columns, you can subset the table. For instance, I can keep only species from the Gomphidae family that have not been assessed in the last 5 years and have at least 10 GBIF records. For mammals and reptiles, you can also filter by RedList authority. You can then order the table by the column you are interested in. For instance, if you want to prioritize species that gained most GBIF records since last assessment, you can order by this column. Note that you can also select species rows to see them appear on the Scatterplot. While exploring that table, you might want to know more on the occurrence records or the articles that were gathered. You can then click on the More button, and some information specific to that species will appear on the top right panel of the app. This section will include a sentence explaining if and why we think this species is a reassessment priority. Then you get a list of the articles we found in the Web of Science, where you can click directly on the link to access the article. Note that Google Scholar will likely have more references. Then you get a map of occurrence records we found in GBIF, where you can see records that were made after the last assessment in red. Note that there may be new records since we published the paper. They will appear on the map but are not counted in the table. If available, we also display the range map from the last published assessment. For species that lost more than 20% of their area of habitat, you will be able to visualize it on the map. For instance, here you can visualize forest loss in the last 3 generations. Sometimes you will see that the high number of records we found are actually due to a mismatch of names between the red list and GBIF, and that some of the records are not of your species of interest. Just discard that information then. With these 3 panels, you can then explore what we suggest are reassessment priorities and make your own opinion on which species you want to assess in priority. When you know that, you can start clicking on these plus buttons. For instance, I want to record that species, then this one, this one, this one, and this one. You can then create your own reassessment priority list. When you are done, you can click on this button to download your list, which will include the information for each species, order as you prioritize them. Don't forget that if you have some questions, you can write a message on the sRedList forum and we'll be there to answer your question and help you. You can also write us an email. We would also love to hear if this Shiny app helps you prioritize reassessment, so please take some time to write us.